the trustees of the and friends of the Institute of Fine Arts, I don't need to give you basic biographic introduction to Mr. Le Corbusier. You know all the important things. But let me say one thing about Tapestry, which is one of the media he explored. As you probably know, he was trained in an art school in La Chaux-de-Fonds. Initially trained to engrave watch gaiters and precious metals. And this is not, for me, this training is very interesting because at that time watches were little machines and works of art. So they were, in a way, a synthesis of what Le Corbusier tried to do, which was an art and architecture of the machine age. So the true realms were present in his early experience as an adult. At the same time, engraving gold cases implied not losing a precious milligram of metal, and it gave to his lines a rigor and an elegance which is unmatched and would not have been the same if he had started drawing on paper. At least an old hypothesis of mine. So anyway, he started drawing La Chaux-de-Fonds, drawing scenes during his first trip abroad, which was Italy, Tuscany in 1907, and he never stopped. So there is a corpus of drawings which is enormous. The catalogue raisonné of drawings is currently being made by Daniel Poli, 2 volumes out. I think the total quantity of drawings he made in his life was probably 8,000. In terms of architecture, I think figures here are interesting. He designed some 400 buildings, counting all the houses in Pessac as one project, and he built 75. This has generated 32,000 drawings kept at the Fondation in Paris. 32,000. The rest of the archive being made is made of correspondence, memos, etc. And quantity is staggering, 1.5 million archival pieces, which are all digitized and can be read there in Paris, and might go online one day. This is one of the big current discussions about maybe something we can talk about later. Painting, he started painting in 1918, and this is what has led to the first tapestry. He started painting under the spell of his new friend Amédée aux Enfants. Very clearly, his first master, Le Platonnier in La Chaux-de-Fonds, taught him to draw. His second master, Perret, taught him to build in concrete. The third one, Behrens, taught him proportion in architecture. And the fourth and last one, no, the fourth one was William Ritter, a Swiss writer. Ritter, who taught him to write through a regular correspondence, and aux Enfants taught him to paint and to seduce public opinion. So painting begins in 1918. He painted probably some 400 paintings also. The Fondation has 18. During the Second World War, he started to design sculpture, not making them himself, but having a Breton cabinet maker by the name of Savina produce them in wood and later painting them. So he made the drawings and then he painted them. Other media are, of course, the naval panels which he made in the 1950s, and all the time written production. More than 40 books, vast quantity of essays. So 75 buildings, 40 books. This is an interesting proportion. And his daily schedule, this is really interesting, was morning in the painting studio, early afternoon writing, and going to the office in the late afternoon to check the work of the employees. So, and of course travel. So painting was very important. And he considered painting famously, this is one of his best known statements about it, as he considered painting as a secret laboratory where he developed his architectural ideas. But in the late 50s, he wrote about tapestry, and I'm going to tapestry, to Oscar Niemeyer, saying that his tapestry was infused with his architectonic ideas. So tapestries can be considered as on the receiving end of architecture and not at the early end, at the beginning. This said very roughly because I have other ideas about tapestries. Let me also say, before we see the earliest work, that I've always been totally uninterested in the Corbusier's tapestries. So for me it was not really a topic. So I took up the challenge of when Almine asked me to give some ideas for this show. I took up the challenge saying, okay, I don't know a lot, I'm not interested, but I'll look into it. And I started digging. And now I'm beginning to be really excited and seeing the world of tapestry is a machine which can explain a lot of things about Le Corbusier's work. So let's start. There are basically two main galleries. Early is here, late is there, and in between there are some different types of stages which I will explain. So let's move to gallery one of So what we see here is the first tapestry Le Corbusier, which was based on a design, in fact, a painting by Le Corbusier. You see the painting here on the right, the tapestry here woven in 1936, and three drawings, including one which uses pastel, with the same theme: woman, boat, and rope. So how did this tapestry come about? It's a very remarkable story. Painters were absolutely, modern painters were absolutely uninterested in tapestry in the 1920s, but a particular woman in Paris brought them to this technique. Her name was Marie Cutoli. She had a gallery called Mirbord on Rue Vignon in a fashionable part of Paris, designed by André Lursa, who was one of the second-level modernists. I had the lousy idea of writing my dissertation about him, so I know way too much about him. Interesting, but clearly not a genius. Anyway, he did some good buildings, and he built the gallery for Cutoli, and his brother Jean who was a painter connected to Pierre Charot, became one of the agents of the Renaissance of tapestry in Aubusson, in the former royal manufacturer of Aubusson in the center of France. But Cutoli was not initially working with Aubusson. She was the wife of a senator from Algeria and had discovered weaving workshops in Algeria. So she started making tapestries, producing tapestries in her Algerian workshops, and had the idea of inviting artists to give her paintings which could be turned into tapestries in the early 30s. Picasso, Derain, Picabia, Matisse, Rouault, Léger. And here Léger became the main operator, leading to the commission of the first tapestry from Marie Cutoli to Le Corbusier in 1926. While Léger had tapestries made by her, in 1935 there were two interesting episodes in the 30s. One in 1935 was an exhibition organized by Le Corbusier and the gallery owner Louis Carré, who was a very important gallery owner, who later in the 50s commissioned Alvar Aalto house in Montfort-l'Amaury, south of Paris, which is the only private house of Aalto outside of Finland. A remarkable house. To be easy to see, Finnish foundation there. Okay, so in 1935, Carré organizes in the apartment, in the building where he was living, which was the building designed by Le Corbusier, where Le Corbusier had his apartment and his studio. He organized an exhibition called Les Arts Primitifs dans l'art de demeure d'aujourd'hui, primitive arts into this dwelling. And Le Corbusier installs a set of works in his own studio, a tapestry by Léger on the wall, a cast of a Greek sculpture, a modern sculpture by Laurence, and a Greek vase, no, a Greek statue, and an African mask. And Le Corbusier suddenly sees in his own very dry studio the power of the tapestry, the tactile power of the tapestry. And this relates to another Léger episode. In 1933, you're all familiar with the history of the International Congresses for Modern Architecture. You know that in 1933 they meet in Athens, famously. Léger is there and delivers this very, very critical speech, Discours Architecte, in which he warns the architects and he attacks them for having put modern man in front of a bare wall in their buildings, and having deprived them from the elementary joys of form and color. So it's, in a way, it pushes the architects to work on the walls. Le Corbusier had already started making murals, but will be reinforced by this discourse. So when Cutelie asks whose lover Henri Laugier was a great supporter of Le Corbusier, and he later became Vice Secretary General of the UN and tried to help Le Corbusier to get the UN Commission in the 40s. So Cutelie asked Le Corbusier to work on a painting which could become a tapestry, which is there, the woman, the boat, and the rope. You see the painting, you see the tapestry, which is an inversion of the painting, if you have noticed, but the same themes were developed before in sketches. So, as a rule, most tapestries we see here were developed out of sketches or paintings or previous works of Le Corbusier, sometimes combined together. This tapestry is interesting because it was made from a painting and not from a cartoon. You know that usually tapestries are made from a cartoon, a drawing which has the size of the tapestry to be made, and which allows not only for the reproduction of the drawing, but also for the selection of color. But this was not the case here. The later tapestries were made after cartoons, and this is something I will explain. So
here, a question on this. I mean, also the cartoons were released, from the 16th century standpoint, so obviously probably the production is a bit different. Usually it's a destructive process of the cartoon, right? So, I mean, they place the painting right underneath the loom and
yes.
On top of it. Okay.
But some of the cartoons have been kept. They're very fragile, they've been kept. We'll talk about cartoons later. So, Le Corbusier is extremely excited by this commission, and he writes to his mom. You probably know that Le Corbusier spent almost his entire life writing to his mom at least once a week, for one very good reason. In the Jean-Louis family, there were two sons, Albert, the elder, who was a musician, a gifted musician, interesting musician, and Jean-Louis and Charles-Edouard, alias Doudou, who was an artist and became an architect. But the family was more oriented towards music. And so they considered that the real genius was Albert. And Doudou spent his entire life writing to his mother to demonstrate that he was the genius, explaining all his adventures, discussing all his successes. So in 1906 he says, great, I've been commissioned to make a tapestry in the former manufacture royale created by Louis XIV, so he was super excited. And then this won't be a rancid tapestry, but something smashing. And then he writes again saying, I will be on pair with Picasso, Léger and Matisse, so super excited. So he made this painting, in which he combined what? You see that there are none of the purist objective type objects which we'll see in the purist drawings. In particular, in one purist drawing in 1926, we see these little objects which are the shell of the banknote, which belong to the category of objects of poetic reaction, which he developed in the 30s, and a symbol in many of his paintings. The woman, because his style has always been interested in the female body, and has made hundreds of drawings in various contexts, some of them colonial and a little embarrassing today for him. And here you see sometimes women in circus, and maybe the contortions of this woman is probably an allusion to drawings he made in circuses around 1920, before 1920. The boat and the rope, this is a motif which comes from his summertime experiences when he was vacationing in Arcachon, or near Arcachon, in the region of Bordeaux, and was really looking very closely at the vernacular culture of the fishermen, their boats, their platforms, their huts. He drew their little wooden huts, and also the theme of the rope, which has very, as you see, very interesting and flexible shape. And what is closest to this, to the painting is here, this little sketch here. So you see, it's dated 1932, and it's very important to see that he used in his works drawings which were not meant in 32. He had no clue about tapestry, but he continuously worked in a way, and this is true also of architecture, because he was sort of documentary machine, looking at things, taking notes, sorting his own drawings and recycling them. So very often, here what we see is that very often in the tapestries, especially in the late ones, there are forms which have developed on various types of in various types of media, in various types of context, meeting. The tapestry becomes a sort of place of encounter for a series of elements. So let's move to the next. Sorry. Let's do it.
Great.
It's a good training to change your arm.
When does he start? I mean, is this contemporaneous with actual mural painting? I mean, when did...
No, mural paintings, he starts, one of the first one is maybe in Vézelay for Jean Badovici in the early 30s. After Léger had done one, then there have been famous ones done in Aileen Grace, and Badovici's house in Roquebrune, and this is 37. So, mural painting comes later. No, it comes more or less at the same moment. But, of course, yes, let's talk about tapestry. So here we have four frames. Three are relative to still lifes of 1949, which are, I think, very interesting because they're hybrid. You see, like some of the tapestries you'll see at the end, you have all the bistro glassware of the purist still lifes, which you probably know from your memory, but combined with more flexible systems of shapes. So Corbusier is trying to extrapolate from the purist still lifes, which he finds too dry, and introduces more flexible shapes. And also you see typical pattern, which is having basically the same drawing, the same line drawing, slight variation, but really a significant variation of color. And here is a sort of lonely piece, which is not by Le Corbusier's hand, but by the hand, according to what I can guess, of a Korean craftsman by the name of Kim Chung-Hoop, who worked for 4 years in the studio in the 50s and made some of the most important drawings for Ahmedabad, Chandigarh, and the Jewel houses before returning to Seoul and becoming a very important Korean architect, extremely famous. He's a national hero for Korean architects, also because he was a leftist and at some point left the country because of a dictatorship. So Kim did that. This is the lower part of the largest tapestry Le Corbusier ever designed, because he never touched the threads, of course. 12 meters by 12 meters for the High Court of Justice in Chandigarh, a building which had a concrete shell and was very dry, so it was asked to do something about acoustics. He had the idea of doing this, designing the tapestry, which was woven in Srinagar, Kashmir. N'est-ce pas, Anu? I'm not mistaken. In Kashmir, by local weavers, and was installed, and is still there today, faded and a little damaged. Anecdotally, some of these rectangles have been cut out to put air conditioners. So, rather profanated. What do we see here is, of course, it's supposed to our drawing. We see the modular man here in the corner. For the Court of Justice, logically, it's the scales of justice, plus all sorts of little things which you can see on a full view of this. Maybe in the œuvre tissée, I can look at the book, maybe we can find it here. So you see it in situ. So it's one of the very few, yes, here is, I think it's not exact, you see that there were many drawings. There were a great quantity of drawings. I don't think that any of these is by Le Corbusier himself, but probably he worked on them, he corrected them. So you see the development, and you see that in the upper range there were all sorts of little guys which are missing from the lower part. Okay, and this is one of 2 in situ tapestries. Only 2 were designed for our specific spaces. The other one is a stage curtain made in Tokyo for a theater designed by Sakakura, who had worked in the office of Le Corbusier before the war, between the 2 wars. So 2 on-site tapestries. All the others have been, some of them are permanently hung in public buildings, one in the UN, one at UNESCO, sorry. I saw one in Sydney's Opera House, which was commissioned by Jon Hudson, especially for the opera, but not put completely in the right place anyway. It must be the third site-specific one. There is one at the Carpenter Center in the basement, which is really badly treated, bad light, very dusty. But all the others were meant to be portable. And this is where Corbu introduced this notion of the mural nomad. So mural decoration you could roll, take under your arm, and take to your new residence if you were moving. So we developed this idea that the tapestry was really a piece of furniture and not a piece of wall. So anyway, this is the evidence of the largest piece he ever made, which you can see. It's very difficult to see because the Court of Justice is very well guarded in Chandigarh. Okay, let's move on.
This too was the medieval Renaissance idea of the tapestry, when you had peripatetic courts, right?
Yes, sure. Absolutely. The rule of the wood with the wood,
where the tapestry.
The tapestry is exactly. You're right. Yes, please come here. So this is the earliest work in the show, and it's a rather nice purist still life. These still lifes were appeared in the work of Le Corbusier as paintings around 1918, when after he had met as enfant. And he worked until the 1920s at these paintings which were based on the rejection of Cubism in the framework of what has been called in 1920s France the return to order, retour à l'ordre, which had emerged during World War I. And here you see clearly that there is a return to the explosive character of Cubism is dropped and the objects are put back into place in order to create a rather reassuring landscape of objects. So here, objective type objects, which are basically guitars, books, pipes, and bistro glassware. So it's interesting here to see what happens. This is 40 years later. In the last tapestry design by Corbusier, you see that the glassware is there, but interpreted in a very different manner. So what is interesting is the constant recycling of shapes. And in particular, here we look at this painting, this tapestry, sorry, 1960, where you see glassware, but also a female body, a woman bent over this composition. And this is something which takes place in a series of sketches, which are parallel. Some of them, this one is before the tapestry, 58, 60, and these ones are made slightly later. But what is interesting here is the research of the confrontation between the glassware, between the static part and the female body, here lying on the back, and in the other cases, this is really what leads into a tapestry there. She's bent over the scenery here, a red form, a red shape here, and the bottle also with the white, with a red circle and a green content, which the bottle curiously in 60 is fuller than in 1958. It's such a miracle. And look here at one interesting, another composition at 64, so it's later than this one, but it gives us a clue to the appearance of stains of color in the tapestries. You see here this papier, it's cutaway paper, like Matisse's papier découpé, which are really a part of what Le Corbusier starts doing in his drawing. Sometimes with colored paper, sometimes with transferred grids, called at that time architects know them zip-a-tone. Zip-a-tone. Have you ever met this? No, you belong to the age of the computer. But when one was working on tracing paper with ink, in order to make grids or particular patterns, you had transfer sheets, pre-printed themes, in particular networks of dots or lines, which were had an adhesive on the back, and you would transfer them. So Le Corbusier sometimes used that. So anyway, what is interesting here are the cutaway papers, including a piece of newspaper, which he later inserted in his cartoons. Now, how did Le Corbusier return to tapestry 12, 13 years after the Cuttoni tapestry? He met a young artist by the name of Pierre Baudouin, who was an artist and a teacher at the school in Aubusson, which was training the weavers of the tapestry manufacturer. And Baudouin wrote some autobiographical statements in which he defines himself as a translator, as an intercessor, translator between the artist and the weavers. So, and in this case, the cartoon becomes very important. And the cartoon was made by Baudouin with the help of Le Corbusier sometimes. There are great photos in which you see the two guys together working on the same theme. So Baudouin would take a painting and would transfer the painting, expand it, enlarge it, at the scale designed for the tapestry, and then work on the color. which was a very important issue, of course. The problem of color is that the colors used in Aubusson belonged to a limited range. And Corbusier didn't like them too much, and there is an interesting triangular correspondence between him, Baudouin, and the German firm BASF, producer of colors in Germany, and with the idea of creating a new set of colors suitable for Le Corbusier's tapestries. So it was very kind to the technical aspects, but without Baudouin, without this translator, nothing would have happened. Baudouin worked on the majority, almost all the tapestries designed by Le Corbusier. 30 were designed, and 28 were woven during his lifetime. Again, compare this to the number of paintings, the number of drawings. It's a limited body of work. But what is interesting is that the tapestries, in a way, are a sort of, and this is something I should have written in a short essay I've made for the gallery, which maybe I could, if it's not printed, I could add something. I think that what I realize now is that the tapestry is a sort of battlefield where teams coming from various drawings are challenging each other, are fighting or composing each other, and it is really interesting. So here we have a few. One of the earliest is here, 1953. It's called Les Musiciens, the musicians, and it is interesting to see how it relates to a set of drawings which were all made in Bogota, Colombia, in 1950. So you see the three women, two play guitar, one is singing, and you see the different variations. So all of this is made on the letterhead of the hotel in Bogota, in Santa Fe de Bogota. And here the women are recombined with other shapes. You see the care taken over the gestures of the hand, the blurring of the figure with big stains on the big colored surfaces. It's also clearly there are also in the drawings and here an erotic component. Le Corbusier again had always been very interested in the female body and its representation, and here it's clearly the base of the entire composition. So this one is one of the most animated. In the tapestries, and here we have only 4 big ones. There are, as you see, the repertory is very ample, and it combines early shapes. Here the shapes of the purists see nicely really recombined. Later theme, which is the famous open hand, which appears in the work of in the 50s, but is the development of the design he had made for a monument to the communist leader Jean-Louis Cohen in 1948. It was initially a leftist symbol, which then became a sort of apolitical symbol in his work. An interesting story, which had been told by Stanley van Roos and myself. And also, you see other things, food, the hand, sometimes animals. He was interested in snakes, in birds, etc., in cows when he was working in India. And this transforms sometimes in his paintings, in his tapestries. Here, there is something which is peculiar in this one. It was made in 1954, and there is, I think, here a clear. Of course, this is the fruiting of the glass. There you see it's repeated here. This shape is interesting, with a long black form and then connected to a more organic one. I see, or have the illusion of seeing, the plan of an interpretation of the plan of the Secretariat building in Geneva, which is very long bar with projecting stairs, which are more or less oval in section. And I think it's one of the possible examples in which the phenomenon he described to Niemeyer in the 50s, architecture percolating in his tapestries. It's probably one such example, but again, it's very hypothetical at this point. Okay, the other tapestries, I've already mentioned the Red Woman, and the post-Futuristic life, and the last one, which is dated, and it's 65. 65 is the year of the Corbusier's death, so it's the latest, and you see that there is a different economy of form. It's much more graphic. It's basically the extrapolation of the drawing, and with the colored surfaces which are clearly derived from the cutaway from the papier découpé of the 1950s. So, in a way, one could also consider that the tapestries are devices through which Le Corbusier goes back in his own memory, in his repertory, in which he accumulates, they could be called, I don't know, the term is probably misused, but or misleading, but it could almost be called palimpsests, or woven palimpsests, in which traces, you see it clearly here, you see that some, the bottles have been repeated, but are half cancelled by other shapes which are coming in front of them. And so there are machines in which the various layers of his work over the years are combined and superimposed.
How are these preserved? Where are they kept?
Where are they kept? Most of them come, I think all of them come from the Corbusier Foundation. And you have to know that tapestries, we are not in the age of mechanical reproduction, to say it with a famous German author, but in the age of manual reproduction. So tapestries are made by hand, and according to, I think the rule in the tapestry business is that tapestry can be called an original if no more than six exemplars are made from a given cartoon. So in some cases, 6 have been made, and no more exemplar can be woven. Sorry?
They're all made in Paris?
No, in Aubusson. In Aubusson, where this manufacturer is created in the 17th century, is still operating. Nothing is made in Paris. And yes, some of them would have been
the option. I mean, Gobelins, right, still exists, right?
Yeah, but they don't. They repair tapestries. They don't make. They make sometimes new things. There is a new director, Villemoine, who is trying to invite contemporary artists. It's a small production. No, they're still operating there. They are part. They're a branch. They've been absorbed by an institution called the Mobilier National, which is the furniture repository for all the ministries and the French embassies. Housed in a beautiful building by Perret, by the way. Okay, so what I was saying is that there are some tapestries which have not reached the threshold of 6 and can still be ordered at the Fondation if you want one. It takes a while because it has to be really made by many hands. Colors have to be selected, etc. But it's technically and legally impossible.
And so, with the gallery show here is part of the idea that fundamentally this could commission additional ones through.
Yes, so actually those 2 were made last year, and those 2 were made at the turnover, so 54 capacity.
Oh, that's great.
And then on the right corner is the emblem of the user.
Yes.
And they changed it, what, at some point?
Because it's a different.
A different workshop. No, because in Augustin you have different workshops. Working.
And this one is not, it doesn't exist.
So the P and C is just coincidence.
Yes. And no, but there are continuing orders. And one of the major collection is the Mori collection in Tokyo, which has been almost only made of tapestries ordered by Mr. Mori in the 90s and early 2000s. So it's still, I wouldn't call it an open work because the drawings are made. But again, it's the manual reproduction of the drawings which is still sometimes possible. And of course, it's an important source of income for the foundation, which lives I must maybe as a conclusion talk about its future. Might be interesting for you. The foundation was created in the 60s on the base of Le Corbusier's will. Le Corbusier had the good idea of not having any children, and this made things really easier. And his wife has died before him, even before his own mother, who lived 100 years. So he gave all he had to the foundation as a sort of initial endowment. His apartment in Paris, his cabanon in Roquebrune, later the house of his brother, and also 2 paintings by Le Corbusier which were rolled in newspaper paper and lying under his bed. And he used to say, "Ce sera pour mes vieux jours." It will be from my old age. And they were sold by the foundation to buy the large house which complemented the house of his brother Albert, and to restore them. So now the foundation has some stocks producing what the stock market produces, and leaves modest reproduction rights on drawings when you publish a book, or more substantial rights when a TV commercial is shot at Villa Savoye. And the main source are the royalties generated by the furniture produced by Cassina, which are divided in 3 parts: Le Corbusier, the heirs of Pierre Jeanneret, and the daughter of Charlotte Perriand. And this produces something like 1.2 million euro or dollars a year, which is divided. And it will stop for Le Corbusier. Everything was, his income will stop in 2035, 70 years after his death. Nothing. So this leads me to the conclusion of the conclusion. What comes next? The foundation has really serious issues about its future. And one of the solutions which was imagined was to create a permanent Le Corbusier museum near Villa Savoye in Poissy, where the collection of the foundation will be exhibited on a permanent basis. I wrote a first sketch project or program for that museum a few years ago, and it has been since in discussion with the local authorities, municipalities, the sort of urban region, the community of municipalities, the département, the region, the state. The evaluation is something like 50 million euro or dollar to build the building, which can be found. It was almost decided before COVID. More difficult is defining an operation budget, a running budget, in order to have a living institution and not a mausoleum, a sleepy mausoleum. And this is not yet solved, also because the political situation has changed locally. Anyway, so the future is not totally totally clear.